zie je de toekomst van mobiliteit? In de hele brede zin van het woord.
Els cotxes elèctrics i autònoms seran el futur, òbviament.
Maar ja, ik heb inderdaad wel eens dingen gehoord over hovercrafts en dat soort voertuigen. Ja, het lijkt me heel vet.
Doordat we steeds meer mogelijkheden inzichtelijk kunnen maken voor de reiziger, wat er allemaal ook aan deelfietsen beschikbaar is, en deelauto's en hoe het openbaar vervoerssysteem zich verder ontwikkelt, dat je dat goed inzichtelijk kan maken voor reizigers, dat ze ook veel bewustere keuze kunnen maken.
Cada vez habrán más transporte público. Yo creo que en Barcelona estamos bastante bien, pero todavía habrán más.
Also ich denke schon, dass Elektromobilität zunehmen wird, ganz klar. Und ich denke auch, dass sich Nahverkehr noch weiterentwickeln wird, dass man eigentlich auf ein eigenes Auto, hier zumindest in der Großstadt, eigentlich gar nicht mehr angewiesen.
Ya 20-30 yıl içinde ulaşım yollarının çok değişeceğini sanmıyorum. Belki arabalar daha işte insansıza doğru kayabilir ama hani uçan araba vesaire 50 yıl önce de düşünülüyordu. Hala da düşünülüyor ama çok yakın gelecekte olacağını ben zannetmiyorum. Olsa da zaten çok karşılanabilir olmaz büyük ihtimalle, tercih edemeyiz.
Úplně nevnímám, že by to do budoucna mělo jako lítat. To si nemyslím. Možná bude víc těch těch dopravních prostředků na elektro nebo hybridy, možná víc.
Hello, it's lovely to be with you this afternoon. I hope you enjoyed your lunch, and we have an opportunity to discuss digital opportunities today. Digital opportunities is covering one of our broad topics that is often been called smart cities. It's been referred to as one of the big data issues, the artificial intelligence. It covers a huge section of our work. We've also been lucky enough in EIT Urban Mobility to have quite a strong representation within our projects to date. So today we're going to be welcoming people from academia, people from European multinationals, American multinationals, and also trade associations who are working in the area from a specific point of view for us today. So we look forward to have a chance to get 4 points of view, and each of our partners will be explaining to us what they see as the great digital opportunities and the challenges and what we need to be concerned about, after which we'll be opening up for questions. So we want to start, I'll be introducing Peter Shearman. So Peter is the head of innovation for CISCO UK and Ireland, and they've been working for quite an extensive time on collaborative research with academia and cities. He's previously had a role in Tech UK and led a large part of the broadband strategy for the UK and the trade associations, and has currently been in CISCO for some 8 years. So I'll hand over to you, Peter.
Super, thank you, Gareth. I am currently playing with the screen share, so hopefully this works. Are you seeing my presenter screen or the normal screen?
We're seeing presenter.
Presenter screen. All right, 1 second. Let me just change the way that we share. And how about now?
Perfect, thanks.
Wonderful stuff. Thank you very much. So, good afternoon, everybody. A real pleasure to be able to spend the afternoon with you. So as Gareth said, my name's Peter Shearman. I'm head of innovation for CISCO in UK and Ireland. I work in the emerging technology and incubation function, and we exist to explore new areas of technology for CISCO, new applications of technology. Things that we wouldn't otherwise get into through our existing business unit roadmaps and innovation strategy. We're home to an awful lot of really interesting and clever people who are a joy to be around. When the idea generation and creation process is quite something. My team in particular is responsible for building real-world demonstrations of new ideas and things that we want to explore as a company, and we do that in partnerships with our customers and channel partners, startups, universities, and academia. And we're interested in bringing together the best of what everyone has to offer, and properly testing out ideas in the wild. So today in the next 6.5 minutes or so, as I chewed up half a minute there trying to figure out the slides, I'll talk to you a little bit about some of the things that we've done in the urban mobility space. Urban mobility has been a big focus for us as a team in the UK. It's a topic that doesn't go away. It's part of our everyday life and as a kind of critical focus. And then I've got my offering for what should we look at in the digital realm for urban mobility, which is something hopefully that will complement the other perspectives you're going to hear today. So we have a track record of looking at urban mobility for the UK. We've recently opened the Smart Mobility Living Lab, which is a connected autonomous vehicle testbed in South London. It's on the old Olympic site in East London, and also along the North Greenwich Peninsula. And it's there to test out technologies actually in the city. So it's public roads, and it's an opportunity to put vehicles ideas. It's not just about the vehicle. So what SML is interested in is the business ideas and the context for those vehicles. It's not just about the technical development, and we need to assess how that interacts with citizens and traffic, but how the business models attach to the things that a city does, the reasons why you have a city, for the commerce, for neighbourhood and community, for leisure, for exercise, for all the things that they're all the reasons we live in cities and have cities. We need to see how autonomous overlays onto that and plays into the interactions that you find in a city. Some of our current activities where we're testing 5G on the Glasgow Metro for how 5G can change the commuter experience, how it is we can digitize their journey and look at how we can make that time more valuable, how we can create more opportunity through providing that type of service. City of Irv was a £20 million smart city demonstrator up in Manchester, where we were looking at a number of transport related active travel use cases and so on. And then we've looked at vehicle tuning in Synergy, how you make the efficient street flow and so on and so forth. And Swift is about how we can look at commuter rail services. So you've got to look. We've tried to look at all these different areas and how you bring them together as a kind of urban mobility proposition. What's exercising us at the moment is that we need to talk about electrification in transportation, and this is a digital opportunity, because actually what we're looking at as with the electrification of city and urban transport is a need for intelligent and flexible energy and grid services. And so one of our current projects is eFlex, and eFlex is a vehicle to grid energy trading demonstrator. And the idea there is that we're using bi-directional charging for electric vehicles, so that the cars become batteries on wheels. And when you reach a critical mass of that, when you can harness all of that power, that gives you some really interesting options and some really interesting modeling that's emerged, saying actually electric vehicles start to become really good for the environment on an emissions basis, on a carbon basis, if you can harness that. Now, we're looking at that as a kind of many-to-many environment, so you find this in closed loop situations at the moment, but we're interested in how you aggregate that, how you put energy aggregation on top of that, in a kind of virtual power plant type of concepts, things like that. And so we've got installations from Plymouth on the south coast in the UK up to Edinburgh in Scotland, and a number in London and others in between, to see how we harness and bring together the energy that from those vehicles. But vehicles are not the only things that are going to be power generating, power and potentially power giving, power receiving. And actually, the pressures on urban grid as a consequence of electrification of transport are something where we need to look at now. You know, and one of the scary counterfactuals that we've looked at in our project is suggests that you've got huge grid reinforcements that need to be invested in, and you've got 30 coal fire stations that you have to power up if you go to a sudden mass adoption of EV, which is where a lot of policy and regulation is driving us to, rightly. But we have to figure out how we're going to make that electrification story work, and that's a city problem, and that is one of those classic smart city challenges where you've got a number of different actors involved who own different parts of that problem, and actually there's a collective response that's required if we're going to address that in a way that's going to make the city fit for purpose for the future. And we think a big part of that is how digital overlays on top of that, and how you have that intelligence that's layered on when you have that crossover between IT, transportation, and power. And that's what's entertaining us at the moment. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Peter. I'm sure they're going to find a lot of interest in discussing that. We're likely to be allocating some additional funds to the very topic that we brought up today. So thank you for that. What we're going to do now is we're going to have a chance to look from an academic point of view. So we are very lucky to have Sidharta Gautama. He's a professor in intelligent systems and AI. We're lucky enough that the University of Ghent is involved in EIT. So I'd like to hand over Sidharta.
Okay, thank you very much. So my name is Sidharta Gautama, Ghent University. Happy to be here. I do research in intelligent systems. And one of the aspects that we are very interested in is when you talk about future of mobility, it's not only about the solution itself, but it's also about management of your city. And I start a bit with an open door and saying that cities and regions are complex environments, which means that if we talk about the future of mobility, we can all agree that we need a more sustainable future. But the devil is in the details. And when we talk about good solutions, there are many sides of this puzzle. We can talk about the affordability of your new service, accessibility for disabled people, social equality of the system, the health aspects. So these are all aspects that if you talk about introducing new technology are things that you will need to take into account. And on the right of this slide, you see an example of the SUMP tool, which we developed for the World Business Council for Sustainable Development, where we made a sort of business intelligence type of tool, where we identified 22 indicators to correctly score new mobility services for a city, so that at least you know the different dimensions that are relevant, and that you can target the right dimensions which are relevant for your city and compare this to other cities. Now, the challenge that we have in this digital society, because although we claim to be an information society, there's a quite big gap between data and information. And this tool has been rolled out in 46 cities in Europe. And already you see that it's not easy to gather this data for cities in order to come to this type of business intelligence tools. And it means that, okay, that there's an investment needed in order to break up silos, in order to come to a homogeneous, standardized way of talking about things. And this is one of the aspects that is really a digital challenge. Another aspect is that apart from the goal, the endpoint, it's also the road which is important. And this is especially true if you talk about change management in cities. And what you see here is, sorry, I don't know if my next slide, okay. What you see here is what we did for the Horizon project review, where we look at transition management for urban vehicle access regulation. And we're actually looking for cities, how can they implement a zero emission zone? How can they make changes in urban space to regulate vehicle access, or how can they invest in new technology for enforcement or curbside management or parking regulation? And what we're building is actually a recommender tool. So a lot of cities have questions. Cities all have a very different context, and what works for one city may not work for the other. So there are a lot of things that need to be discussed, and it's not only about the end result, the zero emission zone, but it's also about this change that a city needs to go through, because we're talking about processes going from up to 5 to 10 years in order to implement a new zero emission zone in a city. And this means that you also need guidance in how to come about in this transition management. And this is specifically what we then focus on. It's life cycle management, going from ideation to operation. It's also acknowledging that there are different changes in different areas that you need to be imposing. So it's governance, user needs, changes in technology or your mobility services. And at the same time, because we talk about these long-term processes, you need to future-proof your solution. Because if you're not careful enough, you're thinking about solutions which may not be relevant anymore within the 5-year end of your cycle. And then to end, when we talk about future of mobility, it's also about the people. We are part of the EIT Urban Mobility Master School. So also when you go into the future, you talk about children, the young people, and the education, because they are building the solutions of tomorrow. And there the multidisciplinarity is very important, because if you want to tackle this complexity, it's not only an engineering solution. You have to take into account your human behavior, you have to take into account your economy, your urban planning. And this is specifically where the Master School is focusing on, in bringing these disciplines together and also crossing the boundaries, because it's an EU perspective. Mobility doesn't end at the border, and it takes a joint effort to come to scalable solutions. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It's always great to have one of our partners present with us, but especially and you've highlighted that idea that silos need to be overcome, a little bit like the complexity that Peter's highlighted that you're trying to. We are privileged now to have a guest speaker who's not a part of our network, but we hope to work far closer with. So we have an organization called the Alliance for Logistics, Innovation and Collaboration in Europe. Everyone commonly calls it ALICE. And we are happy to have Fernando, Liesa with us, the Secretary General, who's going to be helping us today. And he's going to go through a little bit what they see as the technological aspects for sustainable city logistics. Fernando.
Thank you, Gareth. Thank you all the EIT Urban Mobility team for getting us into this panel. In particular, because when you talk about freight transport and logistics, and you are in a panel of future mobility that normally the freight part is neglected, it's very kind of you of getting us here. And I think it's really in the last few months, it has been highlighted how important is freight transport and logistics, and we are having more now that the goods are accepting the people rather than the people accepting the goods. So the goods are moving through the consumption places, even homes, and this is becoming very, very important. So ALICE, we are focused on research and innovation, freight transport and logistics, future logistics and visions to develop the research and innovation agendas and frameworks on how we should advance to make logistics more sustainable and competitive. Let me drive you through the presentation, and here is even if we are in the digital opportunities of future mobility, here for me is the question, is it about technology? We have all these technologies, artificial intelligence, Internet of Things, ITS, blockchain, you name them. And then the question for me is yes, no, maybe. And I would say it's maybe is the answer. And why? don't get me wrong, technology is key, but it's not enough. And I think we had Peter already framing that very well. And what we need first is a framework to leverage the technology. So for example, in the example of Peter, he framed it quite well with the example of the eFlex project opportunity, but the barriers were not so technological, but more on the framework that you need to make this happen and to realize the benefits. So, and then here in Alice, we look into this and we think, in particular in freight transport and logistics, we see in many cities, we lack really knowledge and capability within the cities organizations to really understand or work together with the companies to understand how we can frame together the future of freight transport and logistics in the cities. We are also looking into, I think this was Professor Gautama mentioning in terms of solutions, and we are always looking for solutions, but sometimes is the problem really well defined? Are we addressing a real problem? And here we invest a lot of time in finding solutions, but I think we should invest a little bit more time in defining rightly the problem. And I think the tools presented before were quite interesting for this. And of course, the last one is collaboration. I think all the challenges we are facing, and I think if we think on the individual sector, on individual segments, we have reached the maximum capability we have of improvement. The only way to move forward to the next direction is collaborating, is getting things in a different level of discussion. For example, how we can discuss better between cities, logistics, infrastructure, energy, and find ways for more holistic solutions and an holistic framework in which we can plug in the different technologies and leverage them in the framework. So, and then this is not contradictory, is digitalization is a must, because at the end, when we look into the recommendations presented before, the problem we have is that how you can embrace those recommendations in your city if you don't have the capability to understand and have the visibility of what's going on in your city. Is this recommendation really valid for your city? So then you need to have a better mapping of what's going on in your city to understand if that recommendation is really meaningful for you. And this is why digitalization is so important. And at the end, this we need to look into the perspective, and we are very devoted on what's the long-term vision. And for us, the roadmap is to create zero emissions logistics by 2050. And in the particular environment of cities, this needs to be done quite early, 2030. I think it's possible, it's feasible. And then the challenge for us is how we can make it affordable. And here in Alice, we have developed our roadmap to the physical internet that is nothing else, nothing more than looking into how we use the assets. And for example, in personal mobility, how much time do we use the car? 7% of the time, 8% of the time. The rest of the time is just sitting idle, waiting for somebody. So then how we can make better use of the assets so then we can do more with less, which makes the transition towards the assets in a much more affordable, and how we envision a full utilization of the assets and resources, in particular for freight transport and logistics, and we make better use of the urban space. And then that's all as a starting point from myself, just to say that if you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, we need to go together. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you very, very much. So we have had a theme from Maria when she opened the sessions yesterday on traveling together, going further. And I think it's very apt for us to consider how we do that, tying together organizations like Alice with EIT. You know, we have a great need for your sectoral knowledge and your partnerships to be able to actually build out the answers that we'll need and ensure that we can demonstrate those technologies to the public. So we are happy that we'll have future cooperation in that area. Now, I just want to introduce our final and not least, Siemens. So we are very, very grateful today that we have Jan Schönig. He is from Siemens Advanta, and so he's the director for their urban development and smart city proposals. As we said, many companies, they tend to use this term smart or city while we might normally with urban planners and architects talk about livable cities. And we're trying to pull these ideas together and having smart livable, okay? And if that's an achievement for EIT Mobility in 2 years' time, that we always say smart livable, that would be a great improvement for us. So Jan, you've been, I think it's 17 years or more with Siemens. You've been quite some time, I think it's actually, no, 23 years, but you also had a stay in the Middle East when you worked with some of those burgeoning economies with very different transportation needs from somewhere to Europe, but facing the same decarbonization technology challenges. Very happy to have you here, and we hand over now.
Thank you very much, Gareth. Yeah, I didn't want to tell you how long I'm with Siemens. This reflects a little bit on the age then as well. Yeah, and this is quite probably for most of you now new. What is Siemens Advanta? You know mostly in this kind of set up our colleagues from Siemens Mobility, who are building trains, which set up really very smart traffic management systems. We're working on this autonomous driving topics, vehicle to infrastructure systems, and so on and so forth. And what is now the Siemens Advanta? That is a rather new baby in Siemens. 1.5 years ago, we were announced, still that time under the logo, name, branding, IoT services. And since June this year, we have now a known name, which is Siemens Advanta. We are Siemens, yeah, but we got known branding. We are quite proud of that. That's kind of unique within the Siemens. And that shows as well that we are probably a little bit different. We are the IoT arm. Yeah, we are an integrator. We are taking Siemens products, solutions, and putting them in place for customers. And that comes in my presentation now very much as well for you, how to combine many things for the sake of a better city, yeah, for a better mobility topic, because obviously mobility is a very important topic in a smart city. So that's about the introduction, and let's hope to get to the next slide. Why is it not now here? We look at the city as 4 layers in the meantime. So you have this subground layer where we feel really comfortable with it. Yeah, you have the electric networks, you have the water and sewage networks, gas pipelines. So all this networks management, that's one of our core competences here. Then you have the surface layer with the transportation, obviously, as I just stated with my colleagues from mobility, transporting the goods, but as well you have the farming on the surface layer, and you have these physical services. And then you have the vertical part here, that is the buildings, the campuses, where things like building management systems come into play, elevator systems, and so on. And now with the digitalization, we see now a 4th layer, which is sort of building in an umbrella across all these systems, yeah, and that's where the integration is going to play, because these verticals or these systems I just talked about, yeah, they're very much advanced, yeah. I mean, these building management systems, they are really perfect what they do, or as in electricity network. But the next lever is when you get these information, the systems together. A little bit more technical slide on what I'm talking about, yeah? So you have the underlying expert systems on the bottom here. You have a network, a connectivity layer, which brings this information then to an overarching platform. And on this, you're building then new use cases, new use forms of this integrated data. You can cluster these. We did it here in this case into the areas of buildings, energy, but as well city life, obviously, and for us here the mobility topic. Yeah. And on the very top, you have then the visualization layer. You can run a command center. So this very famous huge screens, which have then the entire view. And probably we want to stress one word here as well, the digital twin at one level or another at the end. So that's a big vision. Obviously, that's not all yet working. If not, we wouldn't talk here about it. We are starting to get these worlds connected. And as it was mentioned as well before, you can do it on your own, but I think you should better do it together. And in the city space, we as Siemens Advanta are working jointly with one of the bigger IT players, with Microsoft. So we have jointly put up a solution, which we call the MindSphere City Graph. What is different here is the way we are modeling the city. Yeah, we are not looking anymore on the asset as such. We are looking at the relation between the assets. So we are using this graph technology. So it's not the device, it's the context of it. And this is then put on a powerful platform where you can run all this analysis and graph technologies. I would like to mention 3 use cases out of the mobility area. There are others which we realized as well. Probably starting because it was mentioned as well by the previous presenters, the e-charging topic. We are doing grid management normally, yeah. But here with the graph, we brought 3 worlds together. We brought the electric, the power generation, the power distribution, and on top of that, we brought in as well the end users, the e-car users, to model what is really going to happen on each charging station. Our partner in this case was the grid operator, because he wanted to provide actually more power to the end users. He wanted to see how we can monetize his information, that he is able to provide above the guarantees of charging capabilities to the end users. Who would pay for such a service? Yeah, so this is where we are looking into. As you can feel as well, they're coming up really new business models. The next layer is going to be, we heard it already about integrating as well then buildings, where you can use then the grid and the e-cars and the buildings as a sort of ecosystem to trade energy in between. And another level is that we can give them the e-car drivers the information where best to charge. Probably they have this usual charging station and they know and they want to go there, but we could give them the information. Why don't you go to the next street where you can charge in 10 minutes faster? Yeah, because there's just at this moment more capacity available. So these are all sort of use cases which are coming up by integrating so many worlds into one. And I'm proud to say as well, we got the Smart City Award on this application, which was awarded, I think, 2 weeks ago at the Smart City exhibition in Barcelona, which was this year virtual as many. A second mobility case along the same line, bringing many data together, was with a smaller city, which wanted to understand what is my bike traffic in the city. Yeah, people are complaining that there's not enough done for bikes, but is it really increasing? Are there more users? And that normal traffic counting didn't give this information, at least not enough. They didn't have set up too many. So we used then video streams from existing cameras where we put an AI on it to identify the different objects. We combined it with the other traffic information to give to the city a holistic picture what is going on. And this we cross-reference then with other data, like the weather data, like environmental information as well. We modeled for one POC a parking information and the construction sites. So we understood then at the end what are the relations in between all these systems. Last one, and probably along the sustainability discussion, there we look at the fact, what is faster to commute, the bike or the car from any point in the city? And you would think, oh, Google can do this. Not really, because Google doesn't take into account the park search time at the target position. So we are taking into the calculation as well, how much time does he need to find a parking space by having all this information, plus then the footpath time to walk to the distance, to the target. And for the bikes, we are enhancing their journey as well with bike-related information like hotspots on accidents, construction areas, air pollution again. Yeah, we have as well a feedback loop in where you can say, hey, every day I drive by, there are cars parked on the bikeway. So enhancing the biking in the city. So these are the 3 use cases I wanted to share with you. And as my other presenter already said, digitalization is a must. I believe totally in so as well. It's changing everything. Thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And it's wonderful to know that we'll be able to work close with Siemens Advanta, given that you're part of our core organizations, and we're happy to have you here. As we step back and we think a little bit about what's been shared, what's very common is digitization for digitization's sake is not going to help us. You know, we know that technology is being rolled out from the energy sector to the transport sector to public safety and security. And we know that there's huge investments being made in technology. But one of our concerns is, how do we harness the value and stop having to reinvest and use existing data that's there to create new value? And I think that's one of the challenges as an investing organization supporting. We've often been asked to support a great deal of investment of technologies for demonstrations when actually infrastructure is there. So that's one of our questions we want to put to you. Where in your experience have you seen positive behaviors from big cities, small cities, etc., on how we can use the data available to create new value? So if that's okay, Peter, do you have an opinion on that? What cities have you seen?
I have, I have many opinions. So actually, a great segue, because when we undertook Cityverse in Manchester, the premise we started with was self-critically, as an industry, smart city propositions were not meeting a need as expressed by a city. It was a very typical one network, one platform. We can sell you the whole thing and everything just runs on it, and here's all your different, but that's not how a city is organized, and it's not how a city thinks about its problems. And it didn't meet governance, and it didn't meet your buying centers or anything like that. And actually, what we did with City of Manchester was to say, well, look, what we have to do is harness what you already have. We have to look at the way that you make your data open. And honestly, it wasn't in a, there was a lot of open data. It wasn't in a consumable fashion. And the consumability of it, we had to work on. But actually, from looking at that, we built an entirely new data brokerage concept and technology that superseded what we were trying to sell at the time, because what we were doing wasn't the right fit for that answer. And actually, it was very much that broking idea, providing access, but providing control, providing assurance and provenance, and providing quality and so on. And we've got to get to, we have to keep doing that, because you have to put the data out there so that we can continue to have that creativity brought into the city to address the city's challenges. And that means that as a plan, you have to plan for that to be exposed. Every new step you take, you have to be adding to that and building into that data framework. But that was a really interesting example because everything that we've done to date wasn't a fit for that challenge.
I think a lot of our city partners could relate to that. We can come to Fernando and Sidharta on your experiences on actually using what infrastructure and assets are there to make a change. Fernando? Yeah,
for me, adding into this, I think, for example, I would like to highlight the examples of Brussels, London, and particularly Rotterdam on how they have addressed the challenge to move to zero emissions freight transport and logistics, because at the end, it's not putting a regulation, okay, by 2025, banning diesel. I think what they made was really to go deeper and understanding the flows, the needs, and characterize where there were the problems, and indeed made a very customized pathway to this in order to not create problems not only for the livability of the city, but for the growth of the economic value of the city. And this indeed, this deep study is getting them to a position in which they have a framework in which now they can really collect and leverage the data, because they know which data they need to take in order to make proper decisions and to see how the system is evolving. And this is, for me, clear example on how you can really build on the technologies and digitalization when you really go deeper into understanding the framework and you collaborate with other stakeholders.
Wonderful. I think it's a great example that we're using what's there, working out the problem properly and seeing if there is gaps that need filled instead of rushing to put huge infrastructure and digital IT. Many of the functionalities and the knowledge or data provided will not actually create knowledge and value. So we're very aware in many of our cities we work with that almost primeval desire to hoard data and not really know if it's actually creating value. Sidharta, you're working in artificial intelligence, big data for a long time. Are you seeing this pattern and how are you working against it?
Yes, for sure. I think that there's a risk to start collecting data before you have stated the problem. Then there's a high risk that you're collecting the wrong data or the data is not well annotated enough in order to answer the question that you think of afterwards. So there's definitely, like Fernando said, first thing about the problem and then look what data you need to answer it, because it could also be easy data. Like you say, there's a lot of survey data available. Maybe you can already gather insight, and then, because data is expensive, once you put in your infrastructure in place or you want to tap into crowdsourced smartphone behavior of people, these are expensive channels to activate. But they can be very useful. We have implemented smartphone tracking in order to set up digital twin environments to have the citizen dialogue up and running, because you have your environment where you can start predicting what happens, and it makes it much more tangible for citizens to understand the impact of certain choices and how it impacts their neighbor. But because everybody understands his own situation, but it's very difficult to know what happens just a few streets on the road. So these types of tools and using data or using technologies in order to come to a certain result, I think that's a good starting point for this.
Great. And I think that's a large part of what we're calling future mobility in the upcoming calls for proposals we'll be doing. And we'll be looking at how the consumer side can benefit from these extensive investments in infrastructure already made. Okay. Now, from your side, Jan, what cities have you been working with that you've seen extensively actually adapting their models and using their data to get new value?
I mean, I'm working primarily in Germany, giving the history of Siemens, yeah, and so they are actually still looking very much into what to do with the data. Yeah, we have a funding program from the German government, which pours out like 800 million euro over 5 years, and so cities are applying, and that started 2 years ago. So there are now around about 50 cities who got financial means to it. And the first phase is a very strategic one, and then comes the realization part. So with this first lot, which was awarded last year, we are getting now in discussions for concrete realization cases. And very exciting, because the concept is here as well that you don't invent it again. Yeah, so they are setting only now up an overarching program management above all these programs to sort of then secure that nothing is again developed in another city. And just to conclude from my side, as well, the concept I presented to you foresees that the core of the application is put on open source. Yeah, so that is obviously an energy and grid operator has some details they don't want to share about their network layout, but the functionality, the ontologies of that can be shared. Though, and this is how we see it's going to work together between an open source and then obviously as well a closed source part, because data is valuable, as we heard as well, and you want to have both options.
Okay, no, wonderful. I think you've raised a very important point there, and we noted, and I'll mention that MindSphere is based on the ETSI Open Smart City Standards. One of the problems that we've all been looking is interoperability, and it's heartening to see that in the upcoming calls on Digital Europe, there will be a process of support for implement once, which means cities will be implementing once a solution, but they should be allowed at any point in time to take their data from one cloud and move it to another cloud and still expect it to work. Now, this brings up an interesting point. We'll be aware recently that there's been lots of talk on what we would call technological self-determination. And we've had this coming out from China, non-dependence on US providers when they'd access cut off to certain technologies. And this has an impact on Europe too. Okay, you know, we have multiple camps forming. How do you think, if we follow this path of technological self-determination, it might impact our cities and our partners? So if we could start this time with Fernando, we'll just go one last question, right? Fernando, what would you think?
I think it's great, because I think Jan already addressed the question in his previous answer with this way on making things more on open source and creating the protocols. So then at the end, we can build open connectivity, and you can have scalable but open solutions that can be used by SMEs, but can at the same time be used by very big companies that are operating in different countries. So then in our physical internet roadmap, I invite you to go in our website. We describe the different types of governance for the physical internet. And one could be a very dominant or few dominant players that are creating those standards as legacy systems. And then everybody works with those few, or we can open up, so then we can make an open environment and creating the scale, but in a more open framework that can be used by many and in the same ways. And this, I think, it's how we can get the sovereignty of Europe in a way of doing things compared to others.
Great.
That are also good.
No, thanks, Fernando. So Sidharta, as an academic who's working on research projects across the world, how do you see this technological self-determination impacting your work?
I think it drives open innovation. I think Jan also already mentioned open source. I think for us it's open innovation, and it needs to be done in research and education as well. But I think it's of particular importance for mobility, because if you talk about mass, these are connected solutions. So it means that it needs to be connected by different competences, different companies who need to work together to offer a good solution. And Jan also showed, we talk about building management, we talk about energy, we talk about mobility. So for sure, these are different drivers, different types of companies or services bringing this together. The same for research. It is multidisciplinary. You need expertise from different parts being brought together. So it ends up in how we do research also, which is much more open-ended, much more multidisciplinary. And we need to think on this together rather than from a single group or a single company as a starting point.
Okay, now thank you very much for your time. We're just coming to the end of the session and we're a tight deadline. I want to thank very much Fernando, Sidharta, Peter and Jan. It's been wonderful to have an opportunity to think about the digital today, what it means, and how we'll be able to move forward in our new coming work plan where we'll be allocating resources, time and effort to discuss this. We look forward to continuing that discussion with all of you. Thank you.